There is a psychological phenomenon that Carl Jung studied for decades, and that explains why some people seem to possess an irresistible magnetism. The more they distance themselves, the more they are sought after and desired. This is not by chance, nor a romantico coincidence. It is the result of a deep mechanism of the collective unconscious that today we will explore together, discovering how the mind works of those who are always sought after when they decide to distance themselves. If you have ever noticed that certain people seem to have an almost magical power over others, that the more inaccessible they make themselves, the more desirable they become, then you are about to understand one of the deepest secrets of human psychology. Jung discovered that this behavior is not a superficial seduction strategy, but the natural expression of an individuated psyche that has achieved a particular balance with its own unconscious, creating a magnetic force that naturally attracts others without any conscious effort. This video does not exist to teach you emotional manipulation tricks or superficial attraction techniques that you find everywhere on the internet. It exists to show you the deep functioning of the human psyche and how some people, often unconsciously, activate in others primordial archetypal dynamics that go beyond any rational logic. If you stay until the end, you will understand not only why this happens, but also how to naturally develop this magnetic quality through an authentic process of personal growth that completely transforms your way of relating to others. The psychology of those who are always sought after when they distance themselves has its roots in what Jung called the individuation process, a path of deep personality transformation. These people have developed, often through intense and painful life experiences, a particular relationship with their own unconscious that makes them naturally independent from the need for external approval. It is not calculated coldness or pathological emotional detachment. It is the manifestation of a psyche that has integrated its own internal opposites and no longer seeks in others the completeness it has found within itself through a long process of self-knowledge. Jung observed that the collective unconscious contains universal archetypes that guide our behavior in ways that we often do not rationally understand with our conscious mind. One of these archetypes is that of the elusive lover, a figura that crosses all cultures and historical eras with impressive consistency. When a person naturally embodies this archetype, it activates in others a primordial unconscious response that goes beyond any rational control of the conscious mind, creating a magnetic attraction that is practically impossible to resist. The psychological mechanism that activates when someone distances themselves is deeply rooted in our ancestral evolutionary nature. The unconscious interprets distance as scarcity, and scarcity automatically increases the perceived value of what we are losing at this precise moment. But be careful. This works only when the distancing is authentic, not when it is a calculated manipulative strategy to get attention. The collective unconscious has an extraordinary ability to distinguish between authenticity and fiction, even when the conscious mind does not notice it at all. I want to share with you the case of Alessandro, a 40-year-old man I followed in consultation who perfectly embodied this fascinating psychological dynamic. Alessandro had never studied psychology or seduction techniques, yet he possessed a natural magnetism that left everyone perplexed and confused. The people who entered his life inevitably developed a deep interest in him, and the more he showed himself independent and detached, the more this interest grew until it became almost obsessive for some. The key to Alessandro's magnetism did not lie in some particular technique that he consciously used to manipulate others. It lay in his personal history of deep transformation that had completely changed the way he related to himself. Had gone through a major existential crisis in his 30s, a period that Jung would have defined as the dark night of the soul, during which he had to confront his deepest and most frightening inner demons. This painful but necessary process had led him to develop a completely new relationship with himself and with others around him. Alessandro had learned, through the direct experience of pain and the deepest solitude, that his completeness did not depend on any other external person. He had not become cynical or emotionally closed, as often happens after traumatic experiences. On the contrary, he had become more open and authentic than before, but from a position of inner strength rather than desperate need. This transformation had created in him what Jung called the magnetic personality of the individuated one, a quality that naturally attracts others without any effort. When Alessandro entered into a relationship with someone, he did so from a position of conscious choice rather than compulsive emotional necessity. He did not need the other to feel complete, so he could afford to be completely himself without fear of rejection or abandonment. This authentic attitude activated in others a powerful unconscious response that went beyond any possible rational logic. Finally, they had met someone who was not using them to fill their own inner voids, but who freely chose to share his own completeness. The psychology of reverse attraction that Alessandro naturally embodied is based on a fundamental principle of the human unconscious, studied by Jung for decades. We desire what we cannot control or completely possess, what escapes our grasp. When a person shows themselves emotionally independent and capable of distancing themselves without drama or manipulation, they activate in others the archetype of the hidden treasure, something precious that is worth conquering precisely because it does not easily give itself to just anyone. But here, we must make a crucial distinction that Jung constantly emphasized in his writings and in his seminars with students. There is an abyssal difference between authentic emotional independence and manipulative detachment calculated to gain attention and control over others. Authentic independence is born from a process of deep personal growth, from the ability to be comfortable with oneself and not to need others to define one's own value as a human being. Manipulative detachment, on the other hand, is an ego strategy to gain control and power over others, a mask that hides insecurity and need. Alessandro told me how, before his deep personal transformation, he desperately sought the approval of others, and how this needy attitude inevitably pushed people away from his life constantly. It was the classic paradox of human relationships that we all experience sooner or later. The more you seek something, the more that thing eludes you. The more you need someone's love, the less that person is inclined to give it to you spontaneously. The unconscious perceives need as weakness. Alessandro's transformation began when he decided to undertake a path of Jungian analysis to understand the unconscious dynamics that governed his disastrous relational life. Through dream work, analysis of his psychological complexes, and integration of his shadow, he gradually began to develop what Jung called transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites without completely identifying with either extreme pole. This individuation process led him to develop a particular quality that made him magnetic in a natural and authentic way: the ability to love deeply without desperately attaching, to invest emotionally without losing himself in the process. He could invest emotionally in a relationship while always remaining aware that his happiness and completeness did not depend on the outcome of that specific relationship, but on his relationship with himself. This inner freedom manifested outwardly as a natural magnetism that attracted people like an invisible but powerful magnet. Jung explained that when a person has integrated their internal opposites, need and independence, love and freedom, closeness and distance. They become naturally attractive because they represent the completeness that we all unconsciously seek in others. It is no longer a half desperately seeking its other half, but a whole that can freely choose to share its completeness with another whole. Alessandro's behavior in relationships perfectly reflected this inner integration he had achieved through years of work on himself. When he met someone who interested him, he showed himself genuinely interested and present, but without that subtle desperation that characterizes those who need the other to feel complete and validated as a person. He could invest emotionally in the relationship, while always remaining centered in himself, and this quality was incredibly attractive to others who perceived it instinctively. When Alessandro felt that a relationship was not working, or that the other person was not genuinely interested in him in an authentic way, he was able to distance himself with grace and dignity, without drama or manipulative attempts to regain lost attention through psychological games. This authentic behavior had a paradoxical effect that I observed repeatedly. Often, the other person, seeing that he was truly willing to live without fighting, realized the value of what they were losing and came back with renewed and much deeper interest. But the most important thing that Alessandro had learned through his individuation process was that this was not a game or a strategy to get what he wanted. It was simply the natural result of having developed a healthy relationship with himself and with his authentic emotional needs, without denial or repression. He did not distance himself to manipulate others and get their attention. He distanced himself because he truly had other priorities in life and was not willing to stay in situations that did not nourish him emotionally. Jung observed that people who possess this natural magnetism have often gone through what he called the encounter with the shadow, a painful but necessary process. A painful but necessary process of confronting the darkest and most rejected aspects of one's personality that we prefer not to see. Alessandro had had to face his tendency towards emotional dependence, his fear of abandonment, and his compulsive need for approval that governed him. Only after integrating these shadow aspects had he managed to develop a true emotional independence that was not a simple defensive reaction, but authentic freedom. This process of shadow integration is crucial to understanding the psychology of those who are always sought after when they distance themselves from relationships. These people are not perfect or superior to others in any way. They have simply done the difficult work of knowing and accepting all aspects of themselves. This deep self-knowledge makes them authentic in a way that the unconscious of others immediately recognizes as precious and rare in a world of masks. Alessandro's ability to distance himself, when necessary, did not arise from coldness or emotional indifference towards other human beings. It arose from a deep understanding of his own value and his emotional boundaries that he had learned to firmly respect. He had learned that staying in situations that did not respect or nourish him was a form of betrayal towards himself, and this awareness gave him the strength to make difficult but necessary choices for his psychological well-being. Jung emphasized that individuation is not a selfish process. On the contrary, it is the greatest gift we can give to others around us. When we become complete in ourselves, we can enter into relationships with others from a position of abundance rather than emotional scarcity. We can love without smothering, support without controlling, be present without being intrusive or needy of constant attention from the people we love. Alessandro's magnetism also manifested in his ability to be completely present when he chose to be with someone. Since he did not have a constant need for attention or external validation, when he decided to invest his emotional energy in someone, that person received his full and undivided attention without distractions. This quality of authentic presence is incredibly rare in the increasingly fragmented modern world, and therefore extremely precious to those who receive it. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Alessandro's psychology was his ability to maintain mystery without being manipulative or calculating. He did not deliberately hide information about himself or artificially create distance to seem more interesting in the eyes of others. Simply, he had a rich and meaningful life that did not revolve around his romantic relationships, and this inner richness naturally created depth and complexity. Jung explained that authentic mystery arises from inner depth, not from calculated secrecy or superficial manipulation. A person who has done the work of individuation has access to deep layers of their own psyche that most people have never explored in life. This inner depth manifests as a quality of presence that is at the same time familiar and mysterious, known and unknown in a fascinating way. Alessandro had also developed what Jung called the function of intuition, the ability to perceive the unconscious dynamics unfolding beneath the surface. This allowed him to immediately recognize when someone was genuinely interested in him as a person, or when they were simply projecting their own fantasies onto him. This discernment protected him from superficial or toxic relationships and allowed him to invest his emotional energy only in meaningful connections. It was not snobbery or emotional elitism. It was simply the natural result of having developed high standards for himself and for the people he allowed into his life. Alessandro's transformation had not happened overnight like magic. It was a gradual process of years of constant work, made up of small daily choices to honor himself and his authentic needs rather than trying to please others or conform to social expectations. Every time he chose authenticity over popularity, truth over convenience, he was building that inner strength that later manifested as magnetism. Jung observed that people who have completed the individuation process possess a particular quality that deeply distinguishes them from others. They are simultaneously deeply human and slightly detached from the ordinary human drama that overwhelms most people daily. They can fully participate in emotional life without being overwhelmed by it, always maintaining a stable center within themselves. This quality of detached participation is incredibly attractive because it represents a form of emotional mastery that we all unconsciously desire to achieve in our lives. Alessandro Once told me that his deepest transformation had been learning to distinguish between solitude and pathological emotional isolation. Before his individuation process, he deeply feared solitude because he confused it with the isolation and abandonment he had experienced. After doing the work on himself, he had discovered that solitude could be a sacred space of deep connection with himself, a place of recharging and reflection that made him more present and available when he chose to be with others authentically. This ability to be comfortable alone without being antisocial is perhaps the most distinctive characteristic of those who are always sought after when they distance themselves. They do not flee from relationships out of fear or cynicism. They have simply developed such a rich inner life that they do not need others. This inner completeness paradoxically makes them more attractive and desirable in the eyes of those who know and truly appreciate them. Jung explained that the collective unconscious instinctively recognizes the difference between those who distance themselves out of fear and those who distance themselves out of authentic inner strength. Fear automatically repels people. Strength magnetically attracts even against the rational will of those who perceive it. When a person distances themselves from a position of inner strength, the unconscious of others interprets this behavior as a sign of high value. It is a deep evolutionary mechanism that leads us to desire what is rare and precious in the world around us. But Alessandro had also learned the importance of dynamic balance in relationships. He was not always detached or inaccessible like an unattainable idol. He knew intuitively when to open up and when to close down, when to approach and when to distance himself according to the natural rhythms of the relationship he was experiencing. This emotional flexibility, this ability to dance between closeness and distance, according to natural rhythms, was perhaps his most magnetic quality of all. Jung called this ability the dance of opposites and considered it the hallmark of a mature and fully individuated psyche. The ability to simultaneously contain opposite impulses, love and freedom, intimacy and independence, presence and detachment, without being torn apart by the tension. This integration of opposites creates a complex and fascinating personality that others find irresistible because it represents the completeness we all seek. The process through which Alessandro had developed these qualities had not been easy or linear, as it might seem told like this. It had required years of work on himself, of honest confrontation with his inner demons, of acceptance of the parts of himself he preferred to deny. But the result had been a deep transformation that had changed not only his relational life, but his entire existence as a human being. If this message has resonated deeply within you, if you have recognized in these words something that you already knew but could not clearly formulate in your mind, then you are ready to begin your own individuation journey towards the inner completeness you have always sought. It is not an easy path, but it is the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to all the people who will enter your life. Remember that authentic magnetism is not a strategy to get what you want from others by subtly manipulating them with psychological techniques. It is the natural result of becoming who you are truly meant to be, the most authentic and complete version of yourself. When you do this work on yourself, you not only naturally become more attractive, but you attract into your life people who are able to appreciate and reciprocate. Like this video, if it touched something deep within you, subscribe to the channel for more Jungian psychology content. Write in the comments which part of the message struck you the most. Because when we share from authentic truth, we create a community. The journey towards individuation is the most important journey you can undertake, because it is the journey towards yourself in your deepest essence. And when you finally arrive home in yourself, you discover that everything you have always sought in others was already inside you.